You've heard of soldiers who fought with guns, but what if I told you there was a group that fought with paintbrushes, speakers, and inflatable tanks? They didn't fire bullets, they fired illusions, and somehow they fooled Hitler's war machine. We weren't soldiers, not really. I was a painter before the war. My buddy designed billboards. Another guy was a sound engineer from Hollywood. They called us the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. But the truth? We were the Ghost Army. In 1944, while Europe burned under the weight of war, America built something no one had ever imagined. A secret unit so invisible, even most of the U.S. Army had no clue it existed. Hand-picked from art schools, ad agencies, and film studios, we were sent into the heart of Europe with a mission no gun could win: to deceive the Nazis, to create entire fake divisions out of thin air. You'd wake up in a field of nothing, and by noon you'd see a whole army appear. Tanks, trucks, cannons, all made of air. We painted shadows, stretched canvas, and pumped rubber. From the sky, it looked real enough to start a war. Hitler's scouts watched from above, convinced they'd found another American division moving in. But what they saw was an illusion. An entire fake army that didn't exist, except in the imagination of 1,100 artists. They told us our weapons were our creativity. They gave us paint, sound trucks, and courage. That's all. And we were told, if the illusion breaks, we die before we speak. Each operation was a deadly game of poker with the enemy's eyes. We'd roll into an empty field at night, and by dawn, it looked like an armored invasion force. Fake tanks lined up, rubber jeeps parked in formation, even tire tracks faked with wooden rollers. It wasn't just art, it was war theater. Sometimes we'd drive the same few trucks around in loops just to make the enemy think we had thousands. One guy even painted fake shadows under the tanks because German pilots knew how real shadows fall. We thought of everything, because if we failed, real soldiers, real men, would die on the front lines. We were the quiet saviors, the ones who fought without being seen and won battles without firing a shot. History buried our story under medals and classified stamps. For decades, no one spoke of us. But make no mistake, this was America's strangest, boldest weapon, an army made of air, sound, and imagination. We were ghosts, and we made Hitler chase shadows. And this was only the beginning. The first time they sent us out for real, the night smelled of diesel and rain. We rolled into a field outside Normandy, the kind of empty patch of mud that looked harmless until you realized it was 20 miles from the front. The thunder in the distance wasn't weather, it was artillery. Every boom shook the air like a heartbeat, reminding us where the real war lived. They told us this mission could decide whether thousands of men live or die. All we had to do was make the Germans believe an entire armored division had just arrived here. We were 1,100 artists pretending to be 20,000 killers. I remember climbing down from the truck and seeing the ground disappear under fog. The air pumps started wheezing, filling rubber shells with life. The first tank rose out of the darkness like a ghost coming up from the earth. Canvas gleamed wet under moonlight, paint still tacky on the metal frames we'd built hours before. From a distance, it looked solid, deadly, perfect. Up close, if you touched it, it wobbled like a balloon. That was our weapon. We worked through the night. Painters brushed markings on rubber hulls. Engineers laid down wooden boards for fake tracks. Soundmen wired giant speakers to the backs of jeeps. When they hit play, the night filled with the roar of engines that didn't exist. The ground itself seemed to tremble. Somewhere beyond the trees, a German scout might have been writing in his notebook, reporting an entire armored column he could hear but not see clearly. That's how we fought, by whispering lies loud enough to sound real. That dawn, we stood back and looked at what we'd made. A fake army spread across the horizon, tanks lined up in perfect formation, smoke rising from barrels filled with burning oil to mimic the smell of machinery. Even the tire marks looked genuine. If you didn't know, you'd swear the invasion was coming from here. And that was the point. We were bait, painted and inflated. By midday, our radio team had set up. They were actors, really, each man imitating a real radio operator from a different division. Their voices filled the airwaves with coded messages, numbers, orders, nonsense designed to sound official. Somewhere, German intelligence was listening. They had to believe what they heard. We gave them what they wanted, certainty. We let them think they'd uncovered a secret. That's what good deception is. It doesn't hide the truth. It offers a better lie. That afternoon, a scout plane passed overhead. We froze under camouflage nets, hearts thumping. I remember hearing the whine of the engine circling once, twice. If the pilot came lower, if the wind shifted the wrong way, the illusion would crumble. One gust could collapse a tank. One stray bullet could deflate an entire division. I could almost feel his eyes on us from above, measuring, doubting. Then, after an eternity, the sound faded away. The men exhaled as one, a long breath of relief and disbelief. We were still alive, and the show was still on. That night, we celebrated quietly. Someone played jazz on a phonograph, its melody trembling through the canvas walls of our tent. The sound felt out of place, too soft for war. But maybe that's why we needed it. We weren't built for killing. We were built to imagine, to trick, to perform. Yet, the stakes were as real as any battlefield. The following morning, we learned that the Germans had shifted an entire panzer unit north, away from the actual Allied advance. Our illusion had worked. We'd saved thousands of soldiers who would never even know we existed. But victory never stayed clean. The next mission came sooner than we expected. We packed up before sunrise, deflating our rubber beasts, rolling them tight, hiding the paint under tarps. A few locals watched from a distance, wide-eyed, trying to understand why an entire army was vanishing into trucks. I smiled at a little boy staring at an empty field that just hours before had been crowded with monsters of steel and air. Maybe he thought he'd seen magic. In a way, he had. We moved east, deeper into danger. Every new position was closer to the enemy. The illusion had to grow sharper, louder, bolder. We learned to layer sound so precisely that you could make a single jeep sound like a convoy. We used lights at night to fake campfires, voices on tape to simulate entire companies talking. We even painted fake mud splashes on trucks because German spies noticed details like that. The smallest slip could kill the act, and us with it. Sometimes, lying awake in the tent, I wondered what would happen if we failed. Would the Germans realize it was all theater? Would they storm the field and find us holding brushes instead of rifles? I used to stare at my hands, stained with paint, and imagine the headlines, "Artists die pretending to be soldiers." I wasn't sure if that would be tragedy or irony. On the third night of that mission, rain came hard. It drowned the speakers, peeled the paint, sagged the rubber tanks. We tried to hold the illusion together, hammering stakes into the mud, patching leaks by flashlight. Somewhere in the darkness, I heard a man whisper, "If they bomb us now, the whole thing will pop." He wasn't wrong. One lucky shell could have turned our masterpiece into shredded rubber and burning lies. But the enemy never fired. They believed what they saw. Or maybe they just wanted to. Either way, we survived. When morning broke, the rain stopped. The sun hit the field and turned the puddles into mirrors. Our fake tanks reflected in them, doubled their number. I laughed quietly. Even nature was in on the deception now. Later that day, command sent word, Operation successful. Enemy reconnaissance confirmed. They'd taken the bait again. The real divisions were already moving through the corridor we'd cleared with our performance. We packed up in silence this time. No jazz, no cheering. Just quiet pride, the kind that sits deep in your chest and aches. People think war is about courage and firepower. For us, it was about imagination and fear. We lived in the thin line between reality and fiction, and every night we had to make the enemy believe the lie more than we did. I sometimes wonder if that changed us, if playing ghosts too long made us forget what was real. But whenever I remember the faces of the soldiers who lived because of what we did, I know it was worth it. That was the night I understood what kind of weapon we truly were. Not guns, not tanks, but stories. And stories, when told well, can move armies.
They sent us closer to the German line than ever before. The real army was crossing the Rhine, and our job was to make the enemy think the attack was coming from somewhere else. That meant we had to stand where the real shells might fall. We drove through villages that looked like ghosts themselves. Shattered windows, roofs gone, smoke rising from chimneys that no one had lit in months. Every face that watched us pass seemed carved from fear and disbelief. To them, we were just another wave of Americans heading east. None of them could know that half of what they saw was made of air. By the time we reached the riverbank, the wind was sharp enough to cut. We unloaded the tanks, the fake artillery, the sound trucks. Every breath turned to fog. The engineers worked fast, inflating shapes that swayed in the cold light. I could hear the rubber creak, the air hiss, the soft thud of boots in mud. The whole thing felt absurd, building illusions while real battles raged just miles away. But absurdity was our weapon. We'd learned that the impossible could be convincing if you sold it hard enough. The sound crew set up first. They'd spent weeks recording real tanks, real artillery, real convoys. Now they layered the tapes, mixing them through huge amplifiers pointed toward the river. The noise rolled over the landscape like thunder. Anyone listening from across the water would think an entire armored division was assembling in the mist. Even we started to believe it. The ground vibrated. You could feel the lie becoming real under your boots. We worked all night again. Somewhere in the dark, the Germans started firing flares, bright white streaks tearing open the sky. Each one froze us in place. I remember staring at the glow reflected on the rubber hull of a fake Sherman tank, waiting for the artillery that never came. The silence afterward felt heavier than any explosion. When the light died, we moved again, faster, whispering instead of speaking, afraid that even the sound of a human voice might break the illusion. By dawn, the field was ready, a perfect copy of a real armored division, down to the last jeep. Radio chatter buzzed in the background, the soundman kept the engines growling through speakers, and smoke machines bled gray clouds across the hills. It was a masterpiece. From the air, it looked unstoppable. Then, mid-morning, one of our scouts came running. He'd spotted movement on the opposite bank. German patrols, binoculars glinting in the sun. We crouched low, hearts hammering. If they fired even once, the whole field could deflate into a mess of plastic and shame. I felt sweat run cold down my back as I watched them through the haze. They were close enough to shoot, but they didn't. They just watched. Maybe they believed what they saw, or maybe they were too scared to find out the truth. Either way, they turned back. That night, we received orders to hold position for another 48 hours. The real army needed more time to cross upstream. That meant 2 more nights of pretending to be an army while praying we wouldn't become casualties. The rain came again, harder this time. It hammered the rubber tanks, filled the fake trenches with water. We patched leaks in the dark, holding flashlights between our teeth, fingers numb. Every gust of wind felt like it might tear the illusion apart. You couldn't tell where fear ended and exhaustion began. Around midnight, I heard something. An engine, faint but real. Not ours. It was coming from the tree line. I grabbed my rifle, though it felt ridiculous, like pointing a toy at a storm. The sound grew louder. Someone shouted a warning. For a moment, I thought it was over, that the Germans had seen through us. But then the noise stopped, replaced by voices, English voices. A jeep rolled into view, headlights covered. Out stepped an officer from the real division we were protecting. His uniform was splattered with mud, his face gray from lack of sleep. He looked around at the field, at the fake tanks glistening under rain, and for a second he didn't say anything. Then he laughed, a short, tired laugh. "Hell," he said, "from a mile away, I'd have sworn you were real." That was the best compliment we ever got. He told us the deception was working. German forces were concentrating their defenses opposite our position, exactly as planned. The real attack would hit tomorrow, miles north, where the line was weak. He shook my hand before leaving. His palm was warm, real. It felt like touching the world again after living too long inside a dream. When he drove off, the sound man turned to me and said, "You realize we might win this war with rubber and tape?" I nodded, but I wasn't smiling. Because I knew what winning meant. It meant the illusion had to hold until dawn. The next morning, the artillery started. Not ours, theirs. Shells whistled over the river and exploded short of our lines. Dirt rained down, mud splashed my face. One shell hit close enough to send a fake tank collapsing on itself, rubber folding like skin. I thought we were finished, but from the air, the damage probably looked like a direct hit on real armor. Maybe that helped. Maybe that sold the story even harder. We held through the barrage. When it finally stopped, the field was torn up, our props shredded, but the enemy didn't advance. Reports came through later. The real Allied divisions had crossed the Rhine with minimal resistance. The Germans had taken the bait, just like before. The Ghost Army had done its job again. That night, we sat around a small fire, silent. No one had the energy to talk. The flames licked at our faces, and the smoke stung my eyes. I thought about the men fighting the real fight somewhere beyond that darkness, and for once I felt like maybe we belonged beside them, not as soldiers, but as something stranger, storytellers with mud on our boots, illusionists who could make death look the other way. When we finally got orders to move out, we left behind the deflated tanks, the torn fabric, the broken speakers. The field looked like a graveyard of ghosts. I turned once before climbing into the truck and whispered goodbye to the shadows we'd built. They'd done their part.
When the war finally
Now
began to
rest.
break, we were still pretending. The front kept shifting east, towns changing hands faster than anyone could paint new signs. Each morning, someone would ask if this one would be our last mission, and each morning, the answer was silence. We'd gotten too good at vanishing. Orders came in coded sentences, always the same promise. One more deception, then you can go home. But lies, even good ones, have a way of multiplying. The last job started like all the others. Empty fields, frozen ground, too much fear. Only this time, the rumor was that Hitler himself was watching the map we were about to redraw. We were supposed to make him think the Americans would strike south when the real assault was coming from the north. 1,000 men against an army that still had millions. We built our ghosts again, faster now, practiced hands making miracles out of canvas and wire. The sound men played new recordings, low rumbles of tanks on bridges, clatter of chains, men shouting orders. I stood there listening and thought, we've become gods of false thunder. That night, while we were wiring the last speakers, the sky lit up red. Real artillery this time, closer than ever. The air turned thick with smoke, the kind that sticks to your throat. Someone shouted that the Germans were moving, that they'd seen movement across the river. We scattered, diving behind our rubber machines. For a few minutes, the world was nothing but noise and light, the earth shaking under boots that weren't supposed to be here. I remember clutching the dirt and thinking, this is how the story ends. Discovered, exposed, erased. But the shells stopped. The wind shifted.
When the smoke cleared, I saw our fake division still standing, dark silhouettes against the fire. From a distance, it looked fearless, unbroken. Maybe that was enough. Maybe even the enemy believed courage could look like that. By dawn, the shooting had stopped completely. Reports came through by radio. The real Allied strike had gone through untouched, exactly where we'd drawn the attention away. It was over, just like that. The war was collapsing in on itself, the Reich retreating, the maps bleeding new borders every hour. They told us to pack up, leave everything. No farewell, no medals, no parades, just ghosts fading back into fog. I remember the last thing I saw before climbing onto the truck, a fake tank half deflated, lying on its side like a dead animal. The paint peeled, the shadow it cast still sharp in the morning light. I thought about all the men who never knew we existed, who would go home believing luck or bravery had saved them. Maybe that was enough. Maybe our best work was the one nobody saw. When we reached Paris, they told us our unit didn't exist anymore. The records would be sealed, classified beyond reach. We signed papers promising silence. They even took the name off our uniforms. For 20 years, I couldn't tell anyone what we'd done. People asked what unit I served with, and I'd smile and say, just the usual. Sometimes I'd catch myself listening for phantom engines at night, the echo of those fake tanks rolling through my dreams. After the war, I went back to painting, billboards mostly, bright colors, big promises. But nothing ever felt as real as the lies we told back then. Every stroke of paint reminded me of a night when color and shadow could save lives. Sometimes I'd see old headlines about battles I knew we'd never fought, victories we'd staged, and I'd laugh quietly. The world believed the illusion long after we stopped creating it. Years later, when they finally declassified the files, a reporter called me. He asked if it was true, if we'd really built armies out of rubber and noise. I told him the truth. We didn't build fake armies. We built hope. Because in a world where death came from the sky, hope had to be built out of something lighter. He asked if I ever felt guilty for lying. I said no. The truth kills as easily as bullets. Sometimes a lie can save a man's life. He didn't write that part down. I'm old now. The names of the men I served with have faded like old paint. Some of them became artists again. Some never touched a brush. A few never came home, lost on roads that were supposed to be empty. But I still remember the sound of the pumps inflating those first tanks, the smell of rubber and rain, the strange pride that comes from making the impossible look real. We weren't warriors. We were storytellers disguised as soldiers. And for a brief, fragile moment, our story was powerful enough to shape a war. Sometimes people ask me what victory sounded like. I tell them it wasn't cheers or gunfire. It was the soft hiss of air filling rubber, the whisper of brushes on canvas, the hum of a generator in the dark. It was the sound of imagination, stubborn and alive. They called us ghosts, and maybe that's what we became. Echoes of an army that never was, guarding the truth that sometimes the greatest weapon isn't destruction, it's deception.